Welcome to the Amphibian Press podcast. I'm Sara, and with me today is LJ Hamlin, and she's an urban fantasy author, and her current series is Visions, but she's produced a lot of work, a lot of standalones, and some short fiction as well. So thank you for joining me today.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Yeah. Now, I haven't gotten a chance to read Blood Visions or Dark Visions yet, so if you want to just give us a quick overview of the series, that would be great.
Visions, it started as a private detective who found out about the supernatural world, but the police wouldn't let him investigate those cases, so he left the police and became a private detective. And on a case, he meets a psychic who is his total opposite. He's like goth and doesn't follow rules, isn't straight-laced. He's just like this really artsy, cool guy, but they click anyway. And the first book is them getting together during a case where they're looking for some missing girls, which turn out to be taken by a demon. And book 2, they go to New Orleans for what is meant to be a nice, easy case. And then they're going to have a vacation and just enjoy themselves. But it gets a little bit more complicated.
It always does, huh?
Couldn't give them an easy holiday.
No. No, there's no such thing. So do you have more books planned for the series, or is it just the 2?
Yeah. The next in the series is Eternal Visions, which is outlined and just needs to be written, which will be that couple's final book. But there are spin-offs in the same world. Like, I've got a short story that's about a mute hunter who it shows a different side of the world, the people who really go out and hunt the supernatural creatures. And I've got another full-length novel that is about the demons side, but not showing that not all supernatural creatures are evil. So it's got a lot planned for the world.
That's awesome. I love spin-offs because it's always, I'll always take a shine to a side character, and then it's like, but I want to know more, and usually the authors deliver. I think authors like spin-offs as much as readers do.
Definitely. A few times I've been like, like with the Paw Prince series, I've got 2 books in that, and the second one was pure spin-off from. There was 2 characters that I loved so much. I was like, I have to do a book for them. Just couldn't resist.
Yeah, that's always fun. So what was your initial inspiration for the series?
Came kind of weirdly from old noir films, like the sort of the detective in the suit in his office with his team and working slightly outside the law, but still with a very strong moral code. So I like those sort of characters, but I was like, what if we did that, but added the supernatural world to it? Because I love paranormal stuff. It's always been my favourite genre. Vampires, werewolves, shapeshifters, anything like that. I love it. So I was like, detective, looking into the supernatural. And it just spiraled out from there.
And luckily, that's becoming quite the genre now. There's a huge audience for it, which I love, because before I feel like it used to be a little campy or viewed that way, and now it's so popular.
Yeah, it used to be sort of like a guilty pleasure, and now it's more.
Yeah, I remember my mom saw something I was reading at one point. I think it was like one of Cheryl and Kenyon's books, and she's like, "Are you still reading those weird vampire books?" I'm like, yes.
Oh, every time they see me reading the book, they're like, "Is it about vampires?" No, this time it's about werewolves.
It's totally different.
You mentioned Cheryl and Kenyon. She's going through hell.
Yeah, I just saw that article that popped up. For those of you who don't know or who aren't watching this sort of in real time, I'll put the link to the article below. Yeah, I was kind of astounded, and we actually had her on this podcast earlier last year, I guess. And yeah, she's so fun and so, strong and determined, and it's hard to see like your heroes.
She was one of the first romance authors I really started reading. I mean,
Yeah.
Like, she was the first one that I went into a bookstore and her books were there and like mainstream and really got me excited about paranormal romance. So she's a very cool lady.
Yeah, she's great. So sort of switching gears a little bit, your pairing obviously is two men, and I wanted to touch on that a little bit because in urban fantasy, I feel like, as much as it's been sort of this previously side genre, as we were talking about, and now is becoming more popular, there's a lot of those tropes of those, like, big strapping guys and then the strong female characters. And I think that sums up my opinion there. And which, great characters here and there. But I feel like there's not a whole lot of queer rep. There's getting to be more, but certainly more on the female side. Which is great. But I do feel like there's
I do FF as well. I do female pairings as well.
Okay, good.
But
yeah, so I was curious, was that part of what drove you to create them, was this void?
Yeah, the void and the fact that it was a area I could write without any of the usual misogyny, the whole women have to be a certain way. And it also helped me distance myself from the characters. I could write very personal rep, like things about my disabilities and my health and mental illness. But by making them male, it felt a little less like I was exposing myself. It was like there's a lot of interesting stories to tell. I've got a lot of gay male friends, cis men, and they're all like, write a book about us. We want to see more of us in these genres, because there just isn't lots of not people doing it. I know some great writers who are really getting rep out there and even getting it mainstream, but if you think about it, most of the mainstream rep is contemporary. It's like Love, Simon, or Call Me by Your Name, things like that. They're contemporary stories. There isn't a lot of romance with paranormal elements for queer people.
Which is funny because I feel like, especially vampires, there's so much subversion going on just anyways, that it fits so perfectly. So it's nice to finally see that come to fruition, so to speak.
Yeah, one of my friends says all vampires are gay.
I could see that, yeah. I think there's probably a whomever thing going on.
They have that sexuality sort of vibe.
So you mentioned that you have a female pairing as well. Do you write exclusively queer pairings, or do you throw some straight folk in there?
At the moment, yes. I think because I'm bisexual, and I feel like there's loads of stories for het people and het pairings. It's inundated in bookstores and stuff, but there aren't lots of options for people like me. So I try and write as many as I can.
That's awesome. I know I struggled with, now I write more queer characters, but I struggled at first when I started writing with that, like, oh, well, there's no place for this. And partially I was pursuing a career in traditional publishing at the time. And so, yeah, that was like, I can't write that because no one publishes it, which is one of the great things about indie publishing.
Yeah, I've been very lucky to find some small queer presses that are exclusively that sort of rep.
That's awesome.
It's been amazing. But even like J.R. Ward's series, that the Black Dagger Brotherhood has a queer male lead in 2 of the books now. So awesome. and she's quite mainstream, well, very mainstream. So I'm hoping that there will be a place for queer paranormal books in bigger publishers as well.
Now, sort of touching on that, when was the first time you remember seeing a character that was like you, either sexually or, with physically, disability-wise? When was the first time you really picked up a book and were like, oh my God, that's me? Because I feel like a lot of more marginalized folk, they have that moment as a reader.
There haven't really been anyone with my disability, because it's, apart from ones I've written, because it's quite rare. I've got a thing called EDS, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome.
Yes, I have a connective tissue disorder, so they're very, very related. So
yeah, so you probably know it's very rare to get them in books. But there are a few times I've read bisexual characters and stuff, and that was always, I think the first time was actually not in a book, it was in a soap opera on TV here in the UK, and they had a young character who, like, in his teens, and I was in my teens at the time, and he fell in love with his best friend and was so confused by it because he'd always liked girls before. So it was like, hang on a minute, how can I like both? Because people don't see it as an option. Obviously there's more than two genders, but that's the way they framed it there. How can you like both? But it helped me realize, well, actually you can like everything. You can like anyone regardless of gender, which is always the way I've been. Gender just doesn't really factor into who I'm attracted to. So that it's good to see books like that.
I always liked the term equal opportunity lover. So
yeah, definitely I'm very equal opportunity.
So how does being chronically ill and having a disability affect your writing? I mean, you mentioned, like, in your bio and earlier, that you use writing partially as a way to distance yourself, but I know it can also be very cathartic to write that way. So how is it both bled into your fiction and then also affected your writing career as a whole?
It affects me because I'm slower than I'd like to, because some days I just cannot write at all. My hands, I can't type, I can't do anything but lay in bed, and so I lose days to that. But in my actual books, like, I wrote a collection of stories called Fangs and Fairy Tales, and it's 2 vampire stories and 2 fairy tale retellings, and out of 4 of them, 3 of them have characters with disabilities that connect to mine, and that was very sort of freeing to write women who were like me. It's almost like a very cheap form of therapy. You get to write and talk it out and think how they feel in that situation and how you feel.
I do think it's so important, especially in romance genres or, romance subplots, to show people like that, people like us, who it's like, oh, well, we can be romantic and we can be seen as desirable, to anyone. And then also with magic, a lot of times I feel like if there is a disability, a lot of common ones are like, oh, well, the character's blind. It's like, oh, their vision has been restored because of their magical sight, which is fine in a lot of plots, but I feel like it treads that, like, oh, but they're cured though. And that's just so frustrating sometimes. So it's nice to see it when it's like, no, it's just part of them, part of the character, it's fine.
Magic cure really, really gets on my nerves. I like it when magic is used as like an assistive device. Like, it helps them get through the world and helps them with their disability, just the same way a mobility aid would help a person in the human world. I don't like it when it just is used to erase the disability, and then it feels like the rep has just been put in just for, like, diversity points. Like, look, I did a disabled character, but they're not actually disabled and it doesn't affect their life in any way.
Right. I didn't actually have to do the homework on how it is. I just, said it, and here it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. So do you use any sensitivity readers for the stuff that you don't personally experience,
Yeah.
or?
Yeah, I always, if I've not personally had the condition or don't know someone closely with it, I either get a family member or a friend with the condition to sensitivity read, because I've done sensitivity reads for other people as well, and I know how important it is to get a set of eyes who are more familiar with the condition that you're
Mhm.
doing or the area. If you've never been on medication, if you've never had surgery and stuff like that, you can't experience it the same way a person who has.
Right. I feel like there's been this sort of pushback. It's like, oh, well, that's just beta reading. You shouldn't have to pay for it. And it's like, well, it's a little bit more than beta reading, because you're paying for that person's experience, just like you would pay an editor for their experience. But I'm so glad to see like a lot more people are starting to understand the value of sensitivity reading.
Yeah, because as well with sensitivity reading, you're setting yourself up for possibly being in pain as well.
Mm-hmm.
You're reading something that's most likely going to upset you. I think that adds, you need to value the person's time, and reading a whole novel and betaing it is hard work. You should give something back, whether you trade for it or pay for it. I definitely think it's a thing you should value.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's so true. I found a sensitivity reader for one of my most recent books, a deaf protagonist, and it was the most valuable thing I've done for my work. It was so important, and there were things that I, of course, never would have thought of, and it just, yeah, I feel like people really need to understand the nuances and the tiny details that you might not realize are important, but they are. So yes, sensitivity reading is incredibly important. And if you have a character that you haven't experienced what they are experiencing, definitely get
Yeah, I definitely agree, and not just because I do it.
one. You don't have to hire us; just hire someone, please.
Yeah.
So obviously that part of your writing aside, what's been your biggest challenge as just an indie author?
I think finding publishers that you can trust and are good, because I had a very, very bad experience with my first publisher.
I'm sorry.
I was with a publisher that didn't pay all its editors, its artists, and its writers for over a year, and still hasn't paid any of us the money we're owed, and shut. They just shut and went like, oh, sorry, we're not paying any of you.
Oh my God, that's awful. I've been hearing a lot of like horror stories like that, like just in the past 2 years. I feel like. So is there no recourse when that happens?
A few people tried to get legal action involved, but the cost of it, and you'd have to actually travel to the state where the LCC was registered.
Yeah.
So no one was close enough to go there and not have to spend more money than you'd probably ever get back.
Part of the plan.
Yeah, no, I've heard a lot of horror stories, but I've been very lucky. I'm with 3 publishers now, and all of them are excellent. They pay on time, they edit everything really well, their communication lines are really good. But that is one of the things with indie, is you have to wade through the slush to get to the good publishers and ones you can trust.
Yeah, I think that there is that trade-off where it's okay, well, you have a little bit more control because you're working with either a smaller press or you're working independently, but you don't have that safety net of like, oh, these people have been vetted and clearly they're successful because look at these bestsellers.
Yeah. Less security, but a lot more control. You get more say on covers and stuff like that, just little things.
So I know we're not supposed to pick favorites because it's like picking favorite children, but do you have a favorite character or a favorite scene that you've written?
I think my favorite character might be Arcady from Rise Again. He was a dancer in the book who has a accident and injures his knee badly, which comes from my life. I had a very bad injury on my knee, but I was a chef, and he had to give up his career and change it, and I had to give up my career and change it. So he's sort of like my little baby. So I was like, I feel bad for doing anything mean to him. It feels like you're just being mean to yourself. It's like, why am I doing this?
I'm actually just looking down the barrel of that choice too, starting to switch careers from archaeology to something a little bit more sedentary because my body can't do it anymore. And it is such a complicated process. Like even if it's a job that you're sort of indifferent about, just the logistics of it alone, it's awful.
I was very passionate about cooking, but it was like 12-hour days on your feet and stuff like that, and I'd be in like a pain coma when I got home for days afterwards after working. I care for my disabled mother as well, so I can't work a job like that that's gonna knock me out, make me useless, and look after her and write. So it was, but I think if I hadn't given up the chef job, I probably wouldn't have got published. So it was the right choice for me.
Yeah, it's a hard trade-off, but people have asked like, oh well, you know, if you could do it over again, it's like, no, this is fine. It doesn't mean it's easy, but it's okay. Yeah, for sure.
Definitely the right path, the right experiences.
Yeah. So are your books exclusively Amazon? Are they available print, digital?
Everywhere and print.
Oh yeah, good. I know what I'm gonna do later.
I've got a me shelf of my books.
Yeah, it won't be clearly. So what do you have planned for 2019, 2020? What's coming out soon?
I've got 5 short stories coming out. One this month on the 16th about witches. And then I've got 2 in February and 2 in March. And then coming out January 16th, which is 2 male witches. And it's a second chance romance. They were in love as teens and they get to meet again as adults.
That's my favorite. I love that. I love second chance.
Quite a cute story. And then I've got 2 out in January. 2 out in February and 2 out in March. I'm about a week away from submitting what I refer to as Demon Book, which is a romance with a demon and a witch. And then for the rest of the year, I think my big project for the year is going to be FF that's Victorian Wishes, which I'm really excited about writing. That's my big goal, is to finish that, and it's quite a large project.
So that must take a lot of research to sort of factor in the historic aspect of Victorian romance.
Yeah, definitely a lot of research, even from down to like the names. You've got to see if that name was even in use in the time period you're setting it in, and whether they would have that type of cutlery, whether they'd have that wallpaper, whether they know different little references of artists and stuff. So it's like every small detail needs to be checked and double checked.
So when you draw from your inspiration for your different world building, I know a lot of urban fantasy has different myths and legends. Do you choose a specific culture, or do you draw from like one thing in particular, or do you just sort of throw it all together in a bag?
I usually try and make up as much as possible because I don't like to steal too much from any specific culture, and I don't want to appropriate any culture that I shouldn't. But I take like little bits from history and little bits from things I've seen, and then twist it with my own sort of imagination. I just let my imagination run wild.
That's kind of the fun part, right?
It is. Plotting is my favorite part.
Yeah. So I think that's about it. Um, just to recap, I've been talking with LJ Hamlin, urban fantasy author from the UK, and your work can be found on ljhamlin.com, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And where else can prospective readers find you? It's like social media, etc.
They can find me on Twitter, Instagram, Tumblr. I'm pretty into my social media.
Well, that's part of the fun too.
Yeah,
and
if they
I'll
want to ramble and complain, they can.
ask you, when is the next book coming out? Come on.
Yeah, nag me because I need that.
Yeah, that's the hold us accountable, right? So yeah, I'll put links to all of those in the show notes for sure. And thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. It's been really fun. I was terrified to start off with, but you're really kind. So,
well, with 1,001 tech issues, right? You're clearly not the least prepared of all of us. So. But yeah, so
it was very nice of you. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. This has been the Amphibian Press podcast, and I'm Sara Boris. Thanks for joining us.